Episode 71 of the Interpretation Station is called to order. Welcome, everybody. How's everyone doing? Welcome to a new episode of the Interpretation Station. It's a tutorial we've got for you today. It's provided to us by none other than, of course, the head of the Interpretation Station fan club worldwide. Yes, ambassador and plenipotentiary, His Excellency, Mr. Dwayne Parker. Oh, yes. Now, Dwayne has provided to us a statement. This is a tutorial for you Spanish to English interpreters, or English to Spanish might find it useful as well. It's on a very sensitive issue we've got today. So it's the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories, Israel. It's a very topical issue, obviously, with all the recent outbreak of violence there over the last month, and it's a topic that keeps coming back to, well, the Security Council. It's in the media, all the time. It's an issue that there never seems to be a sort of resolution to the issue, unfortunately, and so it's definitely something that we need to know how to handle. It's really a matter of having an idea of a bit of the history to it, also the technical terms involved, the positions of the various sides. So in today's statement that Dwayne has provided to us, it was made, actually, it was a couple of years ago. So you might say it's a bit out of date. But no, to be honest, I think that with this issue, the underlying themes, they're really quite enduring. The terminology used, all that sort of stuff changes very little. So obviously every year or two there's a new flare-up in violence, a new incident, unfortunately. And so those are always sort of popping up. But the underlying issue, the underlying stakes tend to change very slowly. Okay. So this statement was delivered by, I think she was the Cuban ambassador at the time, Anayansi Rodriguez Camejo. So she was vice president of the Committee for the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question, from the 22nd of January 2019. Now, before we actually go and listen to the statement itself and see how sort of analyze Dwayne's work, I'm going to give you a little background to the conflict. Okay, it's very difficult to do this. I mean, it could take hours, days to go through all the vagaries of the Arab-Israeli conflict, and I think I advise you actually to do your own reading. That's really the best way to find out what's going on, rather than have me go into all the specific details and incidents that have occurred over time. I mean, I find I read different sources. One moment you feel sort of sympathy for one side, you read another source, you feel sympathy for the other side. It's a very sad situation, really. But that's, I think, the best way to do your own independent reading to find that out. I will merely confine myself to a few years and numbers, okay, that I think are useful for us sort of objectively as interpreters when working on meetings on this subject. Okay, I'm going to try and keep it very plain and just highlight those few years that you really should know, and some of the resolutions that you should know that are gonna crop up almost every time. Okay, so the first year I'm going to give you. Okay, so the first date of note, the first year of note, is 1947. Now, in 1947, the United Nations General Assembly, so the UN is still very much in its infancy. We're only 2 years after World War II, and the UN is only just up and running. It's taken over from the League of Nations, right? It adopts Resolution 181. Resolution 181 mandates the partition of mandatory Palestine into an Arab and Jewish state, with international status being given to Jerusalem. So that's the first big step towards putting into practice the creation of what is now today modern-day Israel and Palestine. Now, this comes in the wake, actually, this resolution, of a quite intense sort of tensions on the ground, shall we say. A year previously, 1946, you'd had, it's a very famous incident actually, the King David Hotel bombing, the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, which was the headquarters of the British administration for Palestine. So that attack was carried out by the Irgun, who were a sort of Zionist underground organization. Because basically the British ran the country up until 1947. They had this mandate from the UN to run it and find a solution to the situation. And I don't think any of the parties, the hosts, shall we say, were particularly pleased with the British presence there. So you had a lot of terrorist attacks going on prior to 47. So anyway, that's 1947, Resolution 181. This is followed. So this is rejected. I believe the Arabs reject this. They don't want the creation of a Jewish state. 1948, you have what's called, this is a big year. You have what's called the Israeli War. The Israelis call the War of Independence, and the Arabs call it the Nakba. That's a very important word to recognize. The Nakba, it means catastrophe in Arabic, and they will often refer to it as the Nakba. And you can actually, when they talk about the Nakba, if you hear that mentioned when interpreting, you just call it the Nakba. It's quite a very well-known term in this context. So it's the first big Arab-Israeli war, and it leads, as I say, to the Jews declaring the independent state of Israel. Now, the next big date, we're going to fast forward a bit here, 19 years, in fact. And it's a crucial year, 1967. Remember this year, because this is the year of the Six-Day War, okay, where a sort of coalition of the Arab states, primarily, I believe, Egypt, Syria, also Jordan and Iraq, following 20 years of various tit-for-tat attacks, I guess, of a lower level, they decide to attack the infant state of Israel, and this plan turns into a bit of a disaster because the Israelis are pretty much ready for them, and they basically lay waste to the various Arab armies. And this is the year that after following that incident, this is the year that really consolidates sort of Israeli statehood, if you like, because after that Six-Day War, one of the outcomes is this is with the Arabs, the Israelis seize all these territories. So they take all of the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and as well also that includes what's now the Gaza Strip. They take Transjordan from Jordan, which is today known as the West Bank, and they take the Golan from Syria. So this, of course, the Israelis call that the Golan Heights. When the Arabs talk about it, you want to call it the Syrian Golan. So this is the year that the Israelis really gain a foothold, and it leads so that that conflict leads to the passage subsequently that year of another very important Security Council resolution, this time Resolution 242, which introduces for the first time the concept of land for peace. And it's where the Arab states start to accept that they may have to at some point recognize the state of Israel, and that if they want to get their lands back, they will have to recognize Israel. Moving on then to 1973, okay, another big conflict here, the Yom Kippur War. Okay, so this is Egypt under Nasser attacks across the Suez Canal. So they're looking to reclaim the Sinai, that territory that they lost to the Israelis in 1967. And they actually make quite good progress. The Syrians also, it's a joint attack with the Syrians, and the Syrians initially, they sort of take back some of the territory up around the Golan. The Israelis then fight back, though, push things back close to where they started pre the initial Egyptian attack. And it goes down. I mean, the Egyptians consider it a sort of mitigated success because it showed that they still had the military capabilities to really pose a threat to the Israelis. But anyway, so that Yom Kippur War leads to the adoption in 1973, later that year, of Resolution 338. So Resolution 338 ultimately brings an end to the Yom Kippur War, and you see some sort of territorial changes taking place. So the Egyptians regain control over the Suez Canal, which is obviously a crucially important waterway. And it paves the way, basically, for the Geneva Conference of 1973, and it also, and so Resolution 338, although not, it's often quoted together with Resolution 242 in a package. When delegations speak, they'll often refer to the two. So the next major date that you'll hear about is 1987. We're fast forwarding now to 1987. That is the first Palestinian intifada, sort of uprising against the sort of occupation, the Israeli occupation, both in the West Bank and around Jerusalem and in Gaza. Again, that's a word you can just render as intifada. Then 1991, you have the Madrid Conference. That's a sort of bit of a famous landmark conference. So the Madrid Conference is an attempt to revive the peace process through negotiations involving Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. So it's an attempt to bring all the other Arab countries on board. And it also here, there's a number of tracks, what are called tracks, are developed, bilateral and multilateral tracks. And you'll notice certainly the Russians, funny enough, they speak a lot about tracks in the Middle East process. And it was only when I did the sort of research for this episode that I realized where those references to the tracks come from. It's from then, from Madrid, and the decision to split the peace process up into those tracks. So if you hear tracks referred to in statements about the Middle East peace process, feel free to render them as tracks. Moving on to 1993, the Oslo Peace Accords. Okay, this, if you remember, is the famous, meeting on the lawn of the White House. Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin shaking hands, signing the Oslo Peace Accords. Of course, Rabin, 2 years later, in '95, he's murdered. He's assassinated by one of his own people, by one of a right wing, a sort of far right wing religious extremist. Then, now moving to 2002, the passage of the adoption of Resolution 1397. At the Security Council. And this is the resolution that first introduces the terms living side by side within secure and recognized borders. Okay, the two countries, Israel and Palestine, living side by side within secure and recognized borders. So this is something that is referred to all the time in statements. That's a sort of formula that you really should know by heart. And they certainly refer to it in the statement that we're going to be looking at. Now, another important year is 2003. So in 2003, you have the adoption of Security Council Resolution 1515. And the 1515 includes what's called the Quartet Roadmap, which again is something that's still very much cited to this day in all talks about the peace process. The quartet of negotiators being the United Nations, Russia, the US, and the EU. They are the sort of four main protagonists. And so then the final year I'm going to give you then is 2011. So in 2011, the Palestinians decide to unilaterally apply for UN membership at the General Assembly. obviously they know it's doomed to fail from the start, because they know that the Americans are going to veto any application at the Security Council. It's more a symbolic gesture, though, if you like. The Palestinians by this point basically say they're not going to hang around any longer, and that the time is they're going to apply. They're going to basically declare independence, apply for UN membership here and now, and que sera, sera, shall we say. Now, to finish with, before we move to Dwayne, I want to then focus on the final resolution of importance, the most relevant at this point, which is Resolution 2334, which was adopted in 2016. It was in the sort of final days of the Barack Obama presidency, and it was a rather controversial resolution because it was one of the very few times the Americans have sort of stood down from defending the Israeli position almost categorically. And that resolution was essentially about condemning the spread of Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. So it was all delegations voted for it, with the exception of the US, who abstained from the vote. But as I say, even that abstention was significant, because obviously it allowed because it allowed basically the resolution to pass. Now, why is that an important resolution? It's a very important resolution just simply for us. It's so useful because of all the wording that's contained with it. It's not a very long resolution, but you could just, if you ever, you're being assigned to a meeting that's going to be about the Palestinian question, you can just basically read that resolution, and there is so much gold in that resolution, essentially, for our job, like all the set expressions, as I say, that are constantly invoked by various delegations. And so we're just going to have a quick look through it. I've highlighted some of these expressions, and I really do advise you to make a note of some of them. They will help you greatly. So here is the resolution. So I'm going to share my screen with you. So here it is. So Resolution 2334, adopted on the 23rd of December 2016. In fact, when it was adopted, I guess by this point, the US elections had already been held in November 2016. I guess Trump was, at this point, the president-elect. So yes, it was a very controversial resolution, because Obama more or less gave this resolution the green light when he was basically on his way out of office. So anyway, as you can see here, you have the various resolutions cited that we talked about: 242, 338, 1397, 1550. They're the big ones. Now let's look at some of the wording here that's important. The inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by force. Okay, very useful wording again. There's a real reference towards the Israelis. There's sort of telling the Israelis off. You cannot acquire territory by force. The occupying power. So this is what the Arab delegations always refer to the Israelis as, the occupying power. And Israelis called on to abide scrupulously by. Very nice sort of collocation that you can apply to many different meetings, actually. To abide by its legal obligations and responsibilities under the Fourth Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilian persons in time of war. Okay. Another important event that is often cited is the advisory opinion rendered on the 9th of July 2004 by the International Court of Justice, the ICJ. And the gist of that opinion, it was an advisory opinion by the ICJ, is that according to, so I'm just quoting here from the UN site, Israel's building of a barrier in the occupied Palestinian territory is illegal, and said construction must stop immediately, and Israel should make reparations for any damage caused. So, as I say, referred to frequently. Then we have here altering the demographic composition, character, and status of the Palestinian territory. So often the Arab states will accuse Israel of trying to alter the demographic composition, the Judaization of Jerusalem, for example. That's a word you're going to hear, the Judaization. Construction and expansion of settlements, very important, the idea of settlements, okay? Confiscation of land, demolition of homes, displacement of Palestinian civilians. This comes up again all the time. Another useful phrase here, imperiling the viability of the two-state solution. Again, the Arabs say, in fact, the countries that are more pro-Palestine will say that these settlement activities imperil the viability. So remember that collocation. Again, very good one, imperiling the viability. Okay, then the Quartet Roadmap we've heard about. And the Quartet Roadmap, it calls for a freeze by Israel of all settlement activity, including natural growth and the dismantlement of all settlement outposts. Again, a common grievance against the Israelis is this: they call on them to stop continuing this settlement activity. Going down here, this is a classic. This is a classic. Live side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders. I think I said that a few minutes ago. That's perhaps the most important of them all, the most frequently cited part of these resolutions, of this resolution. Eroding the two-state solution and entrenching a one-state reality. Again, very useful to talk about eroding the two-state solution. Creating conditions for successful final status negotiations. Again, this is all the time. Always talking about final status, final status. I'd say that because often there's talk about with the solution, and there are times, for example, just because of the wording of the source text, that it may seem the most obvious solution is say a final solution for this problem. Now, you pretty want to avoid using the expression "a final solution" because of all the connotations. Obviously, with the concentration camps, Hitler's plan for the Jews in World War II, it's an expression, final solution, obviously, that carries a lot of baggage, shall we say. So that's just, I would say, a definitive solution, something like that. Avoid saying final solution in the context of this sort of thing. A just, lasting, and comprehensive peace. Again, very useful collocation to know. Completely cease all settlement activities. Again, very useful. That's what they're always telling Israel to do. Stop the settlement activities. Cessation of all Israeli settlement activities is essential for salvaging the two-state solution. This is, again, great wording to know. And it's all just given in this short resolution. It gives it all to you. Observe calm and restraint. This is something that they say in all situations of conflict. This doesn't actually really just apply to the Arab-Israeli conflict, but all conflict in general. The diplomats will come out and we call for calm and restraint, and to refrain from provocative actions, incitement, and inflammatory rhetoric. Again, classic UN speech material here. Exert collective efforts to launch credible negotiations on all final status issues in the Middle East peace process. So yeah, final status is fine. Final solution, not so fine. And then the last one here, a just and lasting peace in the Middle East on the basis of the relevant United Nations resolutions, the Madrid Terms of Reference, including the Principle of Land for Peace, the Arab Peace Initiative, and the Quartet Roadmap, and an end to the Israeli occupation that began in 1967. Again, so that's a final one. That's a really crucial set of ideas there that you want to capture. For example, the Russians, when the Russians speak about the problems in the Middle East, they will always refer back to this, like the solution has to be based on these sort of pillars, okay? The relevant UN resolutions, the Madrid Terms of Reference. Remember that, the terms of reference, by the way, because sometimes coming from the other languages, you'll get the impression it's like points of reference or the sort of benchmarks. The word in Spanish or French, whatever, will suggest that, but it's terms of reference is the correct wording. Principle of Land for Peace, Arab Peace Initiative, Quartet Roadmap. And it's always to do, that everything should be the end result should take us back to the pre-1967 borders. So that 1967, like I say, crucial year, and that certainly the Arabs see the definitive solution to the problem ultimately lying with a restoration of those borders pre-1967. Okay, so there you have it. Background over. That is, to the best of my knowledge, more or less, is as an overview, a brief overview of the situation then in the Arab-Israeli conflict, Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Some of the most important dates, resolutions for you. To the best of my knowledge, maybe I got some little details wrong with some of the causes of the various conflicts in 67, 73. Do your own reading, find out exactly for yourself what you think lies behind it all. I hope that will help you when you come to doing statements on this very unfortunate problem. So, okay, without any further ado, then let's move on to the statement itself by Dwayne, and let's see what he did. Okay, so here we go then with Mr. Dwayne Parker interpreting Mrs. Anayansi Rodriguez Camejo, then, the Vice Chair of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. Here we go.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. As you mentioned, it is an honor for me to deliver this statement on behalf of the Committee on the Exercise of Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. At the outset, I would like to congratulate the Dominican Republic for assuming the presidency of the Security Council.
Okay, so just ante todo, at the outset, okay, that's a very nice diplomatic turn of phrase there. The Dominican Republic then at this point is the president of the Security Council. Just by the way, Dominican Republic, if you're pressed, if you're under pressure, you can call them the DR. You probably want to call them the Dominican Republic first time around, but the DR is an acceptable sort of acronym for in English for the Dominican Republic.
The committee also congratulates all of the new members of the council.
So this is a bit of a flower in Spanish, isn't it? Hace extensivas sus felicitaciones. And so Dwayne just deals with this nicely. He doesn't get thrown by the flower. He just says, the committee also congratulates the other members of the council. If you wanted to slightly reflect that flower, you could throw in an adverb there. The committee also sincerely congratulates the other members of the council, or offers heartfelt congratulations to the new members of the council.
President, meeting for this first open public quarterly debate of the year to examine the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question, we urge the Security Council to make 2019 a year of action and progress on the road to achieving fair and lasting peace and the full exercise of inalienable rights of the Palestinian people.
Okay, so there's a few things here. Trimestral, so you see what Dwayne did there? Quarterly. There's sometimes a temptation to fall into the trap of saying the trimestral in English, but we don't really talk about trimesters, do we? Maybe semesters sometimes with a university, but when you hear trimestral, you want to be saying quarterly, so that's good. The question of Palestine, the Palestinian question, that is what the issue is referred to as, so you feel free to just use the cognate when you hear la cuestión de Palestina. And then here we go so una paz justa y duradera. This is like what we're talking about, right, from Resolution 2334, isn't it? So the exact wording there, the exact word that is used there is a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace. I mean, what Dwayne is said is fine with fair, but if you really want to hit, the bullseye with these solutions, the syntax, the wording given in the resolutions is just and lasting. And the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, again, is something of a set phrase that you should know.
We must collectively correct the historic injustice to an entire people subjected to occupation without independence and deprived of its dignity and basic rights, and above all, the right to self-determination.
Okay, corregir. So Dwayne's sort of gone with the cognate to correct. Okay, that's okay. Perhaps something along the lines of, we must remedy or we must rectify collectively this historic injustice. De todo un pueblo. He's gone with to an entire people, which is nice. Privado de su dignidad. So he's gone with deprived, which is fine again. The other alternatives perhaps for privado, denied, stripped of their dignity, but deprived's good.
Even more proof that it is a full-fledged member of the community of nations.
Okay, just a couple of things here. Miembro de pleno derecho, full-fledged member. Very nice, that is. La Comunidad de Naciones. Now, this is an expression she's going to use a few times in this statement, and Dwayne renders it as community of nations, which is absolutely fine. Now, there is an expression, though, which is the Comity of Nations. And the Comity of Nations basically means one nation respecting the laws and institutions of another. Now, is it perhaps a slightly antiquated term? Perhaps, but I've got to admit, I quite like it, and I do use it because it almost shows a sort of in-depth knowledge of the organization. I mean, that is what underpinned the whole idea of creating initially the League of Nations and the United Nations. Nations basically respecting each other's laws, and that was the expression for a Comity of Nations. So I quite like that expression, and I would perhaps, certainly in an exam, imagine if that was an exam, I might drop that in, a Comity of Nations, because it sort of shows to the examiner that, oh, this guy knows his stuff. He really knows some of the background, the history to it. So it's a good expression to know, especially because she's going to use it several times in this statement.
The largest group of member states of the UN elected the Palestinian state to occupy the presidency of the Group of 77 in China, so that it would lead this group, and which represents 80% of the global community in all of our collective negotiations in 2019.
Okay, so this is a reference, yes. So the state of Palestine was elected to be the chair of that group, the G77. They are a big group, G77 and China. So Dwayne calls them the Group of 77, but you feel free, certainly within the UN, to call them the G77 and China. They're a big player. Everyone knows who they are. One thing I would correct him on, though, so he says the Palestinian state, for Estado de Palestina. This is really its constitutional name, the State of Palestine. Okay, so you really want to be saying the State of Palestine as opposed to the Palestinian state. You may think it's a minor thing, but it's actually quite important, that because you want to reflect the actual constitutional name, as I say.
This is an important event which must receive due consideration.
So he's gone sort of literally word for word, debe recibir, must receive due consideration. Perhaps in English it would be more natural to say that merits due consideration, for example.
President, allow me to remind you of a few events that marked last year and should serve as a reminder of the task that we have before us.
Okay, so permítame recordar. So this is more for you English Bs. If you want to say remind, you need to throw in a direct object there. Let me remind you of some of the events. Okay, we can't just say, let me remind. You can say, let me recall. Let me recall some of the events that marked the past year. So, as I say, that's just a quick thing for you English Bs. Deben servir de recordatorio, serve as a reminder. By the way, if ever you want a good collocation with a reminder, a stark reminder, if it's something quite bad, it should serve as a stark reminder.
The political paralysis and the stagnation in the peace process continue.
Okay, paralysis, political paralysis, that's fine. Just use the cognate in English. For estancamiento, so Dwayne said the stagnation. I like also using stalemate. It's the sta in estancamiento. That sta makes me think immediately of stalemate. But I guess the same could be said maybe for stagnation. That also begins with sta. So whatever sits most comfortably with you. But yeah, so I like stalemate. Dwayne likes stagnation. I think either are fine. What about the limbo? Maybe the limbo in the peace process. There's an idea for you.
The lack of a political outlook continued to be a source of frustration for Palestinians and Israelis, and the region continued to be threatened by the ongoing risk of an increase of destabilization.
I like what Dwayne has said for Horizonte Politico, the political outlook. I think I just said when I was doing it myself, I just said political horizon perhaps, but outlook is nice. And then riesgo constante, the ongoing, so Dwayne has gone with the ongoing risk. I think in English we also talk about there's an ever-present risk, an ever-present danger. And de un incremento de la desestabilización. I mean, in English, we would probably maybe say, you could just say of further destabilization. I mean, here, I think Dwayne rendered it as an increase in destabilization. Perhaps it might sound in English better just to say further destabilization.
The civilian Palestinian protest in the Gaza Strip have been going on since March of 2018, and indiscriminate violence from the Israeli occupying forces have led to a large number of victims, including the death of several children.
This is an interesting expression, La Valla de Gaza, the Gaza Strip. It's not one like, usually in Spanish they call it. So usually in English it's referred to as, in Spanish it's referred to as La Franja de Gaza. So I'd not heard of that, La Valla de Gaza, but I mean it comes down to the same thing, the Gaza Strip. You can even just say Gaza. I mean, when we say Gaza in English, it pretty much refers to that whole area. And I had an idea, fuerzas, la violencia indiscriminada ha causado un gran número de víctimas. So, has caused a large number of victims, has led to, also in English we talk about has claimed many victims. This earthquake claimed how many lives. That's a sort of collocation that we use a lot, that the word claim to describe these kinds of unfortunate events.
The committee has repeatedly called on Israel, the occupying power, to lift the illegal blockade in Gaza, which has gone on for 12 years.
Okay, so here we go, la potencia occupante, so the occupying power. That's a crucial little phrase to remember. Lifting the illegal blockade. That's, again, a good collocation to talk about. The Cubans, for it. Cuba knows all about the blockades, right? The U.S. embargo against Cuba, so they're always urging the U.S. to lift the blockade, lift the embargo on Cuba. So that's, lifting blockade, lifting embargoes. And then prolongado durante 12 años. So perhaps in English we would talk about something that's dragged on for 12 years. I think that's the idea that the speaker's trying to convey here. I mean, you can just say has gone on for 12 years, that's good, but if you want to just take it up that slight notch to really reflect that sense of maybe frustration, we might in English say, which has dragged on for 12 years.
We must avoid at all costs a military escalation and a catastrophic conflict. It is necessary to immediately respond to the serious humanitarian crisis, particularly by stepping up support to the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East, as well as other UN organizations that provide vital assistance.
Okay, so a couple of things just to note. First of all, so notice how Dwayne turns this long sentence. These are all quite long sentences in this statement. Again, this is where you need to sometimes break them up to just make it more manageable. So after un catastrófico conflicto, he basically goes full stop. We must avoid a catastrophic military conflict at all costs. It is necessary. So again, when you're working, especially from Spanish, this is very much a legitimate approach to try and just break up these longer sentences into smaller ones, smaller, more manageable ones. Now, as to the substance in that whole sentence, so this is a very important entity whenever they're talking about Palestine. To give it its full name, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East. And goddamn, Dwayne gives it the full-on name. He even gets the Near East. It's not actually called the Middle East. It is the Near East. That's just what it was originally called. But you can feel free to call that agency UNRWA. So when I was doing the statement, I just called it UNRWA. Now, the only thing when you do that, so I know the speaker gives it its full name in Spanish, as it appears in the text. So when I heard, apoyo al organismo de obras públicos y socorro, I knew immediately, that's UNRWA. So I just said UNRWA. And then you're sort of sitting and waiting a bit, because it is quite a long name. You're sort of sitting around, looking around, light a cigarette. So that's stylistically, the only slight drawback of doing that when it is a really long name. You almost feel obliged you should be saying something, but at the end of the day, if you need a break, you need a break, and UNRWA is a perfectly legitimate acronym that you can use for this organization. Otros organismos, so I think he said agencies, UN entities. Again, that's one of those words, organismos, where you can go with either agencies or entities.
Regretfully, despite the efforts underway by Egypt and other actors, Palestinian reconciliation has not moved forward.
Just one thing here. Is that an Americanism, Dwayne? Regretfully? Do you say that? We say regrettably in British English. So I don't know if Dwayne just misspoke there, or maybe that's an Americanism.
The committee believes that Palestinian unity continues to be the best guarantee for a politically stable and economically viable future for the Palestinian state.
Just a very small thing. So yeah, viable is a word that often gets used with reference to this whole situation. So yeah, creating a viable Palestinian state is an important adjective to be able to use there.
As we have heard, the construction and planning of Israeli settlements continue, including demolitions and the confiscation of Palestinian goods, even in eastern Jerusalem, as well as incidents related.
Okay, so this is a couple of interesting things here. This is quite a nasty, the way this clause kicks in. Es continúan sin cesar la construcción y planificación de asentamientos israelíes. The way it just launches in with the verb, really, this continúan. We don't know what the noun is. We just get the verb. And now the way I did this was when I had continúan sin cesar, I just said non-stop. I said, as we've just heard, non-stop we see the construction and planning of Israeli settlements. So that is a word, non-stop, that you can sort of throw in, and it's quite a handy expression, because you can sort of start a sentence with it. Non-stop, they've been doing this, that, and the other. So that was my idea there. But again, if you wanted to express this sentence best in English, the way we would most naturally do it in English is to say, the construction and planning of Israeli settlements, continues unabated. But it means you're having to store in your memory this continúan sin cesar. So you need to sort of find a way around that. So
planning of Israeli settlements continue, including demolitions.
So Dwayne, he holds the continue. Okay, he decides, he takes a decision. Okay, I'm going to drop the sin cesar. So you just wait, holds the continuous, and it says the construction and planning of Israeli settlements continues, which is a fair enough way of doing it. You miss that slight nuance of the sin cesar, but you don't lose the flow of it. So again, with these sort of things, everyone has their own sort of favorite tactic of how to approach it. So I think my way is good. I think Dwayne's way is good. One thing, it talks about bienes palestinos, confiscaciones de bienes palestinos. So he talks about Palestinian goods. I think when you talk about goods, you sort of think more maybe specifically about merchandise, right? Food or merchandise, right? I think the idea is assets. It's a bit more than just merchandise. I think it's Palestinian assets, all the things they own.
And the confiscation of Palestinian goods, even in eastern Jerusalem, as well as incidents related to settlers in violation of Resolution 2334 of 2016, among others.
Okay, colonos, again, very important concept in this whole conflict. Settlers, okay? And there's the reference to the big resolution 2334.
The recent announcements of plans for new settlements, which go even further into the West Bank, near Ramallah and Bethlehem.
Okay, so se adentran aún más. So I had to think about this. So Dwayne just said that go further into Cisjordania, so the West Bank, as he rightly says, and go further is fine. And I think I said something similar to that. Then when I thought about it, what would we most likely say in English? And the word came to me, to encroach, which encroach even further into the West Bank. So, there's that verb, there's that word for you. Maybe if I keep repeating it in these episodes, at some point you'll be able to use it. But yeah, so just bear that. It's a good, useful word to encroach on someone's territory, to encroach on someone's mandate. There's a number of contexts where that verb encroach could come in useful. Oh, and Belen, Bethlehem. Okay, that word if you're not used to doing this subject matter, that's a word that might throw you. It's very important. Sit down, obviously, Bethlehem, in Spanish, Belen. So, yeah, just make a mental note of that one.
As well as the inauguration of a 5-kilometer highway longitudinally divided by a cement wall to segregate Israeli and Palestinian traffic.
So again, this is a very long sentence. So here, okay, talking now about the highway, the Caritera. I think I said motorway again. British English versus American English. I think both are fine. Muro de hormigón. Hormigón is again one of those words that again might not come up all that often. Certainly in my line of work, we don't often talk about concrete, I must say. So it's one of those words that can suddenly surprise you when it gets mentioned in the context of an issue like this. So yeah, hormigón, okay, concrete or cement,
and connect the settlements from the outside of Jerusalem are new serious violations of international law.
Okay, in las afueras de Jerusalén. So he said outside Jerusalem, perhaps slightly nicer, might be in the outskirts, let's say, of Jerusalem, in the suburbs. And constituyen nuevas violaciones. Remember, the verb like constituyen, if you're under pressure, you can just say are. I mean, that does the job. These are new grave violations. Again, you could say they constitute violations. They amount to violations. But if you can't, if you don't want to, if you're just focusing on just getting that meaning, you can just say they are grave violations.
Even the Israeli press talks about highway apartheid when it refers to this new highway. The illegal activities of the occupying power, namely the scheduled demolition of entire Bedouin villages like Khan al-Ahmar and Abu al-Alou, and the transport of their community, have only served to quickly capture the attention of this council.
Okay, so again, I like demolition prevista, so he says the scheduled, American English, scheduled demolition of the Bedouin aldeas, like towns, villages, So, okay, back in 2019, this was Khan al-Ahmar Abu al-Helu. This was sort of topical at that time. Well, the one they talk about today that's very much in the media, that one that gets all the coverage, is Sheikh Jarrah, which is a neighborhood, I believe, near around Jerusalem. So if you hear that, Sheikh Jarrah, that's the sort of the big one at the moment, where something similar is being happened, demolitions, transfers, etc. And this is el traslado de su población. Okay, so Dwayne talks about the transport of the population. Perhaps the resettlement of the population maybe is a better reflects what's happening. Although, are they being resettled? We don't even know if they're being resettled. So tricky. So yeah, during transport, the resettlement, and then for this expression captado fugazmente. So again, perhaps this fugazmente didn't immediately spring to mind to Dwayne. Obviously, with the benefit of hindsight, I guess the best way of doing this in English would be have only fleetingly captured the attention of this council. So, okay, I mean, I take it Dwayne knew. Yeah, I know exactly what they're meaning. Okay, so he just uses only briefly, perhaps would have been better, captured the attention of this council. So sometimes, yeah, you have to think on your feet, and if you can't quite find the mot juste, you try and find a more simple word that more or less gets you close to the meaning.
The international community is not only overlooking the obligations of the occupying power, which are being violated, but also its own obligations as a third party in line with international law.
Pasando por alto, I like what Dwayne's done there. Overlooking, I often say, ignoring, neglecting one's obligations. Another obvious synonym for obligaciones, by the way, if you don't always want to say obligation, is its commitments. It's neglecting its commitments as a third party in line with international law, consistent with international law, pursuant to international law.
And Resolution 2334, a checklist is provided and a path to a fair and lasting solution of two states that live one next to the other in secure conditions within the pre-1967 borders, and with Eastern Jerusalem as the capital of a sovereign and independent Palestinian state.
Okay, some classic terminology when it comes to the Palestinian question here. First of all, just a couple of more minor details. In la resolución 2334 se proporciona. It's again one of these cases. I think we looked at this the last time I did a statement from Spanish, how we address these clauses that again start with the verb se proporciona. There is provision of, you could say. So Dwayne says a checklist is provided. He keeps the se proporciona till afterwards, so that's one way of doing it, obviously. You could just say in Resolution 2334, there is a checklist. Or sometimes you could drop the preposition in, and then start just with Resolution 2334, and then that gives you the option to turn the verb, make the resolution, the subject of the sentence. You say Resolution 2334 provides a checklist. There's a few ways of doing it. And I like that, lista de comprobación. That threw me a bit when I was doing it. So checklist is very good for that. And now all this terminology that's drawn from these resolutions. So solución justa y definitiva. So a just and lasting solution. I think they mentioned that before. And then this is que vivan uno junto al otro. So Dwayne said living one next to the other. Now, if you actually look at the terminology, the exact terminology in the resolution, it's living side by side. That's the phrase you're after. Living side by side in peace. Within secure and recognized borders. Okay, from that, that's the actual wording. So you could see here, living side by side in, you could say in side by side in conditions of security within the pre-1967 borders. As I say, the idea of this pre-1967 borders is an important concept. East Jerusalem is the capital of a sovereign Palestinian state. One little thing to note, by the way, with the city of Jerusalem, sometimes you'll hear it referred to as Al-Quds, often by the Arab delegations, whoever it may be, Iraq, Syria, they'll tend to refer to Jerusalem as Al-Quds. And if you hear Al-Quds, you just repeat it, okay? You say Al-Quds. That's the Arabic name for Jerusalem. So the sort of, at least at the UN, the sort of rule is, if they say Jerusalem, you say Jerusalem. If they say Al-Quds, you say Al-Quds. So just bear that in mind, because it might come up.
The committee welcomes the written report by the Secretary General regarding the application of this resolution, and we look forward to future reports in the same format.
I like what he's done here, Dwayne. Acoge con satisfacción. He just says welcomes. Okay, you don't really even say welcomes with satisfaction. When you say you welcome something, I think it's implicit that you do it with satisfaction. Now, what I don't like so much is aplicación de esta resolución. He says application of the resolution. In English, I think we want to maybe say implementation of the resolution, enforcement of the resolution. Applications is okay, but again, not great. Aguarda con interés. That is good, though, to look forward to. I like that.
Also, we welcome the initial measures taken by some parliaments to ensure the enforcement on a national level of paragraph 5 of Resolution 2334, and we encourage others to do the same.
Okay, so he actually, it's as though he was listening to me. So here he says, when it says aplicación, there he says enforcement, so that's good. Acogemos con beneplácito, so it's almost repeating what she said in the previous sentence. So Dwayne says welcomes again, so maybe the one thing I might say is you may want to find a synonym, like commends would be fine. Commends the initial measures adopted. Applauds. That's a sort of good sort of, as my colleague Dan Harrison says, a semantic field. Welcomes, applauds, commends, hails.
Finally, the committee calls on all of the member states to refrain from adopting unilateral measures regarding any issue related to the definitive status in violation of international law and UN resolutions.
Okay, so there's a couple of, so in this sentence she uses exhorta, in the previous sentence she uses alentar. So Dwayne went with for alentar, encourage. With exhorta he went with calls on. You've also got to urge. I like using urge a lot because it's very quick. It's just one syllable and it's got a lot of, the word urge, carries quite a lot of force to it as well. Abstengan de adoptar medidas unilaterales. So again, this is taken from the resolution. Refrain from adopting unilateral measures. You can abstain from doing something as well, I guess. And you can desist from, that's another idea. But at least in the resolution, they talk about refrain from doing certain things. In fact, it's in paragraph OP7 of the resolution. They talk about a refrain from provocative actions. By the way, when I say OP7, when I talk about resolution, this is an important little thing. OP, operative paragraph. So a UN resolution, this is just a bit of a general aside, is made up of two parts. The preambular section and the operative section. So the preambular is all these bits, reaffirming, guided by, reaffirming, condemning. This is where they sort of set the scene. And so when they're doing a drafting, like changing some of the wording of something, they'll refer to a preambular paragraph or PP1, PP2, PP3, whatever. And then then the operative part is the bit that says what's actually going to be done, reaffirms, reiterates, underlines, stresses. This is the real meat of the resolution. So that's called the operative part. And again, during drafting, they'll refer to OP1, OP5, OP6, whatever. So this was in OP7, Refrain from Provocative Actions. And then, again, referring to the resolution, el estatuto definitivo. So Dwayne said the definitive status. Again, if you look here at PP, or what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Successful final status negotiations. So that's estatuto is definitivo is final status. I mean, it's, if you say definitive, it's okay. But if you really want to impress someone, final status.
Measures of this type, if they are applied, will just endanger even more the two-state solution and the possibility of achieving lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians.
And again, here we go. Poner aún más en peligro la solución biestatal, so which again, pretty much taken from the resolution, again from one of the PPs, imperiling the viability of the two-state solution. Okay, so she doesn't actually mention when speaking of the viability, she just talks about imperiling the two-state solution. So again, if you really wanted to impress someone with poner aún más en peligro, it's imperil. Sounds really good, doesn't it? But again, what did Dwayne say? He said to jeopardize, which is perfectly good, which is a perfectly decent solution as well. Biestatal, two-state, not bi-state. We don't have the bi-state solution. Two-state solution. Un paz duradera, lasting peace. That's the collocation you want for duradera, right? You don't want sustainable peace. Again, it's okay, but it's lasting peace is the collocation, the most appropriate collocation.
On a positive note, it should be noted that many member states have stepped up their support to UNRWA to ensure the continuity of its vital operations in light of the unprecedented 2018 financial crisis.
I like what you said here on a positive note. I think when I said something on the bright side, which the register isn't quite right. On a positive note is really the right register. That's good. Cabe señalar. So he said it should be noted. Another example, another solution that occurred to me in English. It's noteworthy that might be an idea. Okay, talks about UNRWA, and then ante la crisis financiera. I think I was also the use of ante here threw me a little bit because obviously ante is usually to do with something that happens before. Okay, but again, it can be used in a slightly different context. And Dwayne got it spot on. In light of the financial crisis, its operations in light of the financial crisis. I think I said before the financial crisis. That doesn't quite make sense if you look at it. I think Dwayne won the interpretation station nil on this occasion.
The committee calls on all of the member states to continue financing UNRWA in a reliable and predictable fashion until the issue of refugees is resolved in a fair and lasting way, according to relevant UN resolutions.
Okay, so a couple of things here. First of all, okay, so exhorte goes again with calls on. So again, I repeat, urge is a very good word for you to use. Now, this was a nasty acronym throw in. OPS she uses. Earlier she talked about, she gave, this is UNRWA. So OPS is the Spanish for UNRWA. And earlier she used the full name, right? And then here she suddenly throws in this OPS. And that in Spanish is Organismo de Obras Públicas y Socorro de las Naciones Unidas, OPS. I've never heard that acronym used before. I can't remember it having heard it, but there you go. So that could be really one to trip you up if you're not careful. So OPS is the Spanish acronym for UNRWA. And then again, this wording, fiable, previsible, sort of viable and predictable. So we're talking about financing, okay? How it needs to be viable or reliable and predictable. Now, it's just what occurred to me here. It's interesting how in Spanish, how the syntax is used. So they're talking about, because it happens twice, okay? So it talks about financiando de manera fiable y previsible. Continuar financiando el OPS de manera fiable y previsible. So in the Spanish, they use basically the verb, like financiar, and then the fiable and previsible, de manera fiable y previsible. It's like the adverb. So it's like financing UNRWA reliably and predictably. Whereas in English, we are more likely to say, to continue to provide reliable, predictable financing. Okay, we turn the financing, we turn that into a noun. So in the Spanish, it's sort of used as more a verb. In English, we talk about providing financing, and the reliable and the predictable would be used as adjectives. And then the second part of that sentence, something similar happens. La cuestión de los refugiados se resuelva de forma justa y definitiva. So it's resolved fairly or justly and definitively. Whereas in English, we would probably say something along the lines of to ensure a just and lasting solution. Okay? So again, we would turn the resuelva, which is being used as a verb in the Spanish, we'd probably make it a noun, and we would make the de forma justa y definitiva, we turn that from the Spanish adverb into an adjective in English. My only point being here is that sometimes when we do that in English, when we say in English, for example, to finance something reliably and predictably, or to resolve something justly and lastingly, some of those adverbs don't quite ring true. Like lastingly, to resolve something lastingly, doesn't quite sound right in English. And again, in English, it sounds more natural to go with the sort of adjective noun formulation, as opposed to in Spanish, when it seems to be more a case of noun plus adverb. And what's my conclusion in all this? Well, to be honest, I don't really have a firm conclusion to draw from this. It's just an interesting syntactical nuance just to watch out for, and just to sort of think about when you're, I guess it means if you happen to get the text before time, you've got a bit of chance to prepare that, and you want to make it sound nice in English. Don't shy away from throwing in the extra word, right? To provide reliable and predictable financing, or to provide a just, lasting solution. It sounds that little bit nicer in English than completely mirroring the Spanish construction of the verb and the adverb. So that's all. I'll let you know if I come to any more deeper, meaningful conclusion as and when it happens.
The committee firmly believes that while unilateral measures to overcome the current stagnation may be useful, the Security Council has a clear responsibility in this regard, and it is the key to the solution of this conflict.
Okay, so he's gone again for estancamiento. He's gone again with stagnation. Dwayne obviously likes that word for estancamiento. Again, I just remind you to stalemate, deadlock, superar el estancamiento, to break the deadlock, to break the stalemate. Okay, these are good collocations to have.
Finally, we would like to call on all of the member states that still have not done so, particularly the members of the European Union, to join the majority of the states of the international community, 139 currently, and recognize the Palestinian state.
Okay, so one again, just for Dwayne's benefit again, el Estado de Palestina, the state of Palestine. You really need to be saying, okay.
supporting that it become a full-fledged member of the United Nations and occupy the spot that it deserves in the community of nations.
Here's a tricky little phrase in English, or going from Spanish into English. When you hear this, apoyando que Palestina se convierta, okay? When you hear this apoyando que, you always want to be a bit wary here to make sure that what comes out in your English sounds smooth and not a sort of clunky like for like rendition of the Spanish. Because in English we don't really say we support that Palestine becomes a member state. We'd say, okay, we support Palestine becoming a member state. The temptation is to throw that in, but hold off from using the that. Just okay, supporting, because okay, que se convierta plenamente. We know it's talking about Palestine. Okay, so we would probably say supporting her becoming. We call countries her, right? Or it's becoming, if you prefer, one of the two. Supporting her. I like her, actually. I like to call countries her, like ships. That's what we do in English. We call ships she. Okay. I think you could say here, supporting her becoming a full-fledged member state of the United Nations. Okay, I think that's the best way of rendering that. And el lugar que le corresponde. Okay, so Dwayne says the place that it deserves, which is right. So I think perhaps again in English it might sound nicer to say it's her rightful place, to occupy her rightful place in the old Comunidad de Naciones. So as we said before, you could say here the Committee of Nations. Okay. So that would, the full sentence would read, and recognize the state of Palestine, supporting her becoming a full-fledged UN member state and occupying its rightful place in the Committee of Nations. Now, doesn't that sound nice? Okay.
This will help to make 2019 the year in which we achieved peace between Israelis and Palestinians, and it will also be the year in which we finally achieve the goal that we collectively forged 71 years ago. Thank you very much.
Just one thing in this last sentence. So when they talk about, sometimes they'll talk about Israelis and Palestinians. They won't refer to the country, but they'll refer to the people. Israelis y Palestinos. And when they refer to the people, try and stick to the people. I think as Dwayne did, peace between Israelis and Palestinians, as opposed to between Israel and Palestine, because the two concepts, technically speaking, aren't quite the same thing. There's a nuance, a slight difference. So if they talk about the people, you talk about the people. If they talk about the country, you talk about the country. And this goal that we forged together collectively 71 years ago. So I guess she's referring to 1948. This speech was delivered in 2019, or perhaps she's just forgotten what year it was. So I think it's more likely she's referring, I guess, to 1947 with the General Assembly Resolution 181. If you recall from the introduction, partition of mandatory Palestine into Arab and Jewish states, international status for Jerusalem. So I guess that's what she's referring to. Okay, that's the end of Dwayne's statement, and let's move to what Roland's magic moments were. Okay, so here we are then. Time for Roland's magic moments, and then I can go for a well-deserved nap this afternoon. Just here in Geneva, it's absolutely baking here. It's like 30 degrees. I don't know if you can see the sweat on my brow. God blimey. It's hard work making these episodes. I love doing it, but it's hard work sometimes. Go. Anyway, what are Roland's 3 magic moments of the day? Well, for magic moment number 3, I'm going to take you to that resolution, actually. So this resolution 2334, and what's one of the sort of set expressions from that resolution. It's a very good one, just again to remember by heart. And it is a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace. Okay, that's a very good combination, a very good set phrase just to remember that you could just trot out whenever there's a meeting on the Palestinian question. A just, lasting, and comprehensive peace. Not sustainable peace, a lasting peace. You can say, again, the temptation might be a fair, sustainable, and comprehensive peace, but no, you want a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace. Roland's magic moment number 2, the silver medal. And again, I'm taking this again from that same resolution, 2334. As I say, it's a real trove of useful expressions. And this one, again, is perhaps even more common than the one about peace. Live side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders. Okay? You don't need to do anything fancy with it, living one next to each other or anything like that. Just side by side in peace within secure, not safe, secure and recognized borders. That is one they talk about all the time. And finally, magic moment number 1. Roland's magic moment of the day is this expression. It's my trade secret expression, the good old Comity of Nations. Okay? That's the one to really impress, as I say. That's one to pull out for the exam if you're doing it and this comes up. Your examiner will think, my oh my, this gentleman or this lady certainly knows her stuff, eh? The Comity of Nations. When you hear the Comunidad de Naciones, just give it a try. The Comity of Nations. So there you have it. Those are Roland's magic moments of the day. I hope you have enjoyed the episode. If you have, please do press the like button. And if you haven't done so already, please do subscribe to the channel and share the show with any colleagues, any friends who you think might be interested and who might learn something from the lessons. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure being with you. I hope you have a good rest of the week. I am looking forward myself now on tomorrow evening. Big match. By the time I publish this episode, this match will already have happened. But tomorrow it's England-Scotland. It's the big one, and I'm not very confident about it. After Scotland's performance against the Czechs the other day, God, we were dire. So anyway, by the time this comes up, you'll know how it finished. But I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Might pull off a surprise. You never know. Anyway, with that, all I have to say is that episode 71 of the Interpretation Station stands adjourned.
The train is now leaving the Interpretation Station. We hope you enjoyed your visit. Until next time, folks.